I'm just going to change into a gallery view so I can see you all. Great. Um, well, thank you for having me, and thank you for this lovely introduction. And yeah, I'm sort of really delighted to be here. And partly it's because it's this opportunity to reflect on a very important theme and an opportunity to practice together. And I was wondering about it, having quite busy day in the run-up of going away tomorrow. I was thinking, how lovely to meet others and not just to explore the Dharma teachings, Buddhist teachings together and explore experience, but actually it's an opportunity it's a way of getting to know each other and getting to know ourselves. And how wonderful that that's what we all decide to do on a Wednesday evening. So I'm delighted that I've got people to do that with. And yeah, we can sort of find out through these teachings more, we can broaden our awareness of what is going on within ourselves. And I find that very moving in the world today, that we can get to know ourselves and we can get to know how each of us roles really, we can find out, well, what makes me tick? How do I work? How do I do things? And in that way, because when we have that awareness, um, we can shape and we can have an impact in the world. And I think it's really important to have that sort of perspective of being an active force in the world today. And I was thinking, I've got a mitra study or a study group on Monday, and uh, one of the people in the mitra studies in the study group, they're so sort of ready to practice and be different in the world, that they sort of taking on watching Prime Minister Question Time at lunchtime as a way of practicing to getting to know themselves, to getting to know what is sort of emerging for them as they're watching, and then being able to be with and start to, transform some of the experiences that they have. So, how wonderful that we can get together and that we can reflect, learn about, have a particular perspective on how we can think about our experience and how we can reflect on our experience. And in some ways, it gives us power. I think it gives us control. And I think in previous weeks, I understand that you've talked about sort of insubstantiality. You've talked about how things are not quite stable. And in a way, when we get to know ourselves, when we get to know our minds and working with our minds, it actually gives us tremendous power. It gives us tremendous way of being in the world. And it gives us something to hold on to when there is nothing to hold on to, when there is that insubstantiality, instability. So it kind of provides like a moment of freedom or moment of liberation for us, where we can see through things. We can see, I would imagine that you've talked about insubstantiality, and you would have thought about how is it that we fix ourselves in every moment, how we build ourselves. And I've noticed that I live with a partner. I've got a partner that we live together, and we get to talk. We get to talk Dharma over breakfast. That's probably our main talking time. And we were discussing and we were thinking about how we can support a friend. And I've noticed in our discussion that, sometimes we say, I think my partner said something like, well, when I was with this person on a walk, they were like this. And I'm thinking, that's like 2 years ago. That's 3 years ago. And in a way, you can see how we shape or fix ourselves in a particular way. Um, we depict people, we think of people, and we do the same with ourselves. So maybe it's worth considering still, how do you do that yourself? How do you fix yourself in your everyday? How do you sort of put yourself into a particular box? I've got an interesting thing about no longer knowing how to think of myself, whether I've got long hair or short hair these days. And probably at the moment, because I'm going for a wedding and I've decided for my brother that I'll let him have pictures with some hair on my head, because normally it's shaven. But there is this whole, like, am I a person who's got short hair or no hair? Or am I a person who's got like quite longish hair? And sometimes I'm still thinking of myself as this person who used to have long hair. So it's just like this kind of total fixity of how we're thinking of ourselves, not quite realizing that it's constantly changing. It's in the process of change. So, in a way, it's like we're having this experience which is very veiled. I like that word, veiled experience of life. It's almost like we've got blinkers. Like you've got those horses, they've got those blinkers, so they just know which direction to go and not get distracted. And even if it's not blinkers, totally blinded, it might be more like colored glasses. And it's like we put these goggles on to look at experience, and we walk through our life thinking that's what life is like. So it's it's like these veils that we see reality, or that we experience ourselves in the world. So I want to talk or launch into a new aspect of the theme that you've been exploring, and it's the theme of what is the reality like in its nakedness, without goggles. What is reality like when you take your goggles off, when those veils fall off? And the context for this is, it's like we don't really know what's happening, and it's like we're not on board with reality. Because what happens often is that through our goggles, we are habitually thinking, we either pushing something away or we grasping after something. So it's like we get to spin ourselves in painful experiences, and that really causes us suffering. So I'm talking about this theme of impermanence, looking and seeing reality in the context of us often suffering, having painful experiences, and having those painful experiences because of this grasping and attaching that takes place all the time. So, in Buddhist terms, I suppose impermanence is seen as a mark of existence, or it's a mark of reality, or it's a way, it's one of these veils of, where you, actually, I will say it slightly differently with a veil, but impermanence being mark of existence is what reality is really like if you can see that in every moment. It's what reality, conditioned existence especially, is impermanent, or the word, Sanskrit word for that would be anitya. So impermanence is seeing things and seeing them as constantly changing, as opposed to seeing things as being permanent, or seeing or knowing or expecting things to be permanent. And what happens is when we think of things as permanent, or when we see things as permanent, what happens is we get disappointed. We get hurt. It's painful. We trip ourselves through that experience. So the title of today that I'm going to use is Tomorrow Never Knows. Tomorrow never knows. And there might be some geeks in the audience here who might be aware that it is the last song of the Beatles album Revolver. So Tomorrow Never Knows is from Beatles album, and it came to me because I've been immersing myself in Beatles over last couple of months, and I don't know whether any of you have seen the documentary on Beatles that came just before Christmas, sort of December time. And it's a documentary that's in 3 parts, and it's based on enormous amount of footage from live when they were recording the Let It Be album. So I'm just in the moment exploring Beatles, and when I say exploring, it's basically my Saturday night downtime, when that's the time when I'm leaving myself off the hook and I can just relax for a moment, and that's time to have a time off even from practicing. So yeah, but I think with this particular documentary, and I've now seen quite a few documentaries with Beatles, and I'm very fond of the band. I find that the documentary and watching it is incredibly poignant. And it's incredibly poignant because, in a way, that whole documentary was a really strong sort of revelation of impermanence. You can really see impermanence in that. You've got a group of friends in Liverpool, and by the sounds of it, it looks like, people who were different in their circles in Liverpool. Not everybody was up for going around playing instruments and singing in Liverpool at the time. So you've got these bunch of friends who get together, who enjoy doing a similar thing, and they get to live a very intense period of life in which they get to be highly creative in that process as well. And they come together, and then that comes to an end eventually. That comes to an end as a band. And Beatles, for the pop band, had an incredible duration. Pop bands don't last decades. It's very unusual to have such longevity. And yet, when you're actually looking through the life of the band, you can see the sort of coming to being, the arising of the Beatles, where they're forming friendship, they're creating music, they're having a shared project together, and then they're coming out of being. So you can see the passing away in that, and in some ways they're going their separate ways. And they start to have their own careers, musical careers, their own musical projects, and essentially, um, it's only two of them that are alive today. So two of them have passed away. So you can see the arising and passing away, where we got, it's not just like existence and non-existence, or being and not being. It's this flow of conditions. It's a process of becoming. The Beatles were in the process of becoming, of arising and passing away. So when we're talking about impermanence, we're really talking about the flow, the change process. So it's the flow, it's the process, it's change. And in the nature of anything dependent upon conditions, that's what the process is about. We've got, when there are conditions in place, in those conditions, their nature is that they are impermanent. They will arise and they will pass away. So, with the Beatles, I suppose, there was enormous amount of conditions that came to being at the time. The fact that they met, the fact that there was some kind of clubhouse, the fact that there was a youth culture coming along, young people started to have money, women started to have money, they could spend it on buying records. You've got media starting, record companies. You've got the manager, Brian Epstein, without whom the band wouldn't become so phenomenal in the way that it has. And you've got the Beatles originally going on a gig in Germany and just playing for hours every day. It's like practicing. And often we do that with Dharma, like with if we're really serious and want to make changes with our mind, there is that absorption, there is that practicing, there is hours of practice that makes something change, that makes something that make us work with our minds in a slightly different way. So change is inherent in all of that, in all of those conditions. Change is that mark that is part of conditioned existence. And I suppose my question to you is, do you approach life in that way? Do we approach everything in that way? Our life, our everyday, even arriving to the session tonight, do we sort of approach that consciously with impermanence in mind, being aware of that impermanence? And I suppose it's useful to consider where we hold on to in this. What might be our holding? Where is it that we don't take impermanence on board? Where is it that impermanence is kind of like, it doesn't really exist. I'm not taking it on board. And I suppose from my experience, reflecting it, I had many jobs in the United Kingdom, one of which was being a cleaner. And I think being a cleaner is an excellent way of becoming accustomed to impermanence. It's a wonderful practice. And when you clean, it's a bit of an emotional affair. Well, it used to be, definitely for me, a bit of an emotional affair. Because when the house gets cleaned, I'm all happy, I feel very relaxed, everything is wonderful, you know, I'm kind of like, yeah, on top of the world, beautiful environment. And a day passes by, 2 days passes by, 3 days pass by, and I think, oh, the house is a tip. Ugh, I don't like this. And then you think like, oh my gosh. And then there will be this, this like, I'll have to clean again. And then you've got this joy, and then you've got this kind of down sort of feeling. So it's a little bit like, for me, it used to be I used to be like a yo-yo, you know? My happiness, my mood, my way of being was dependent on where I was in the cycle of something becoming or ending, in a way. Um, so yeah, cleaning can be a wonderful way of practicing that, and just knowing and noticing what's happening in relation to impermanence, and whether when, for example, as I'm cleaning or dusting, can I already see in that the fact that it will get dirty in a couple of days? Can I already have that in my perspective, in my experience, and be okay about that? So that's something about learning with the arising and passing away, and being equanimous with that. So I suppose there is this not holding or having this like open palms, where we can be with what is, where we can be with impermanence. And the teachings of impermanence, they come up in various Buddhist teachings. I'm particularly influenced by Tibetan tradition at the moment, and there is a lot of reflection on impermanence. And in Tibetan tradition, the reflection on impermanence is seen as a preliminary practice. It's something that you do before you even get started to do the main practices. It's something that's seen as basic, or that you just start, because it enables you to get into the doorways of any other practices, and it has that potential for awakening in it, because you've got a potential to see things as they really are. If you can practice and reflect on impermanence, you can begin to see how things really are, and that's a real wisdom perspective. That's really truly knowing how things are. And it can have the kind and compassionate perspective as well. So so it can be like a doorway into practices. And we could think of it as preliminary, because it can give us motivation. Reflecting on impermanence can be crucial for motivation. It can give us impetus to practice, to do it now. Tomorrow never knows. Now. Yeah, so it's having that motivation. And when we have intense period of practice, awareness can arise, and we can become habitually different. We can begin to behave in a different way. We can begin to be a different being. So with awareness, being aware, we can actually have this different way of being. And it's a little bit like, I don't know, when you've got a really bad motorway. I don't know whether M1 used to have real tracks in it. So once you got your car and you got in the track, it was very difficult to veer, quite dangerous on a motorway. And it's a little bit like that with our minds, once we go in a particular direction, well, that's definitely, I know when I get annoyed, I know where this is going. It's got one route only, and it's not a pleasant one. It's not, it's difficult to get out of those tracks. So um, it's probably in UK using cross-country skiing might not work like it might work in winter time somewhere in North Europe or Czech Republic. But it's almost like, when you've got those tracks, it's really hard and you're going down speed. It's really hard to jump off those tracks. And I suppose that was my experience recently when I've been practicing. I'm becoming much more aware what's happening in my experience. And what I'm becoming aware is, that I begin to um, behave or act in a very sort of way that I'm not really happy with it. But it's almost like I can't stop that because it's so habitual. One moment leads to the next moment, and my whole body is flooded with emotion. And at that point, it's so hard to draw or muster energy to do things differently. So I was thinking, like, for example, uh, living with my partner, we've had quite a lot of sort of struggles in our communication. And I suppose that happens quite a bit when you're practicing. You become so sensitized, like even tiny sort of tone in communication, looks in communication. You're very sensitive in that. And I was very aware of becoming irritated and just really quite tight. And we were quite under time pressure because my partner went off somewhere, and I was also going off somewhere. And there was a moment he cycles. So he cycles when he goes somewhere, and we didn't part on good terms. Now, for me, being aware of impermanence means that I've got motivation. Like we phoned each other. So we would have left the houses and we would phone each other because that is what can motivate you. Impermanence can give you motive to practice, motive to act in a particular way, because you are aware of what consequences there might be if you don't. So it can be a very motivating aspect with impermanence. I was thinking, I don't know whether with that song Tomorrow Never Knows, the starting lyrics of it, they go, turn off your mind, relax and float down the stream. Turn off your mind, relax and float down the stream. So there is something about being with, relaxing into change, relaxing into arising, relaxing into passing. And the song was influenced by Leary, and I didn't know that before. So all of this is thanks to the coming up with a title and sort of looking more into it, listening more keenly to the song. Sort of realized that book was influenced by the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So it's really interesting how you get different connections in culture. So yeah, with the reflecting on impermanence, it can be like a preliminary practice. It can be, about getting motivation, but it could also be the main practice. You could take reflecting on permanence or practicing awareness of impermanence. And it could be the main practice, and it could be the main practice in the sense that it will liberate, it will bring about freedom. So if you participate directly in impermanence, if you recognize it in experience from moment to moment, that there is only a process of change, that there is only change, there will be particular experience of reality. There is it's almost like reality starts to pulsate. It starts to sort of be vibrant. I don't know whether sometimes any of you have been on a retreat and suddenly everything seems very vivid, or it might be even sometimes after coming out of meditation, or it might be when you've been particularly reflected or particularly relaxed. Something, you might see trees in a different way, you might see blossoms in a different way, you might see people's faces in a different way. You might be, that there might be this vibrancy, this pulsation. So impermanence can give a doorway. It can open a doorway. It can open a gateway, and we call that doorway or gateway mukha, and liberation is vimoksha. So vimoksha mukha is this gateway that can sort of provide, it's like a ticket to liberation, ticket to freedom. But what you're entering is a sphere of liberation. Sometimes that's called vimukta dhatu. So it's this sphere of liberation when you begin to see things differently, or you know things differently. I don't know if any of you know these 3D pictures that they've got like lots of dots, and then you stare at them, and you've got to stare in a very particular way, and in a way you've got to also relax, and then something happens. Suddenly it becomes so obvious, it's got like objects in it, and it becomes so clear and vibrant. So for me, working with impermanence and practicing impermanence, it can be this doorway, this sphere into seeing things differently, knowing things differently. So impermanence gives this doorway to signlessness. So signlessness, animita. And this signlessness is like a clarity or illumination. Because like when you have a sign signifies something, or sign gives us, points to a form for us. So when we have a sign, it points to a form. And the Buddha said, when there is a form, or when there is a sign, there is deception. So where there is a sign, there is deception. And it is because when we have a sign or symbol, label, we're fixing. We no longer necessarily see things in that flow, in that process of change. I was very moved by reading sort of lots of obituaries or little articles by Thich Nhat Hanh, who died recently. So very revered Buddhist practitioner, and he always, whenever he speaks, he's living impermanence. You know that he knows that there is impermanence from how he describes his reality, how he even talked about what might happen at the point of death, what might happen in the well, in a way, he came with a name interbeing, where there is no such a thing as being or non-being. There is just connection and constant flow, constant becoming. Um, and I suppose it's a little bit like, I've had a cup of tea when I met Kemini and Vimala Chitta, and it's where is the cup of tea now? Is it coming out of my mouth as I speak? And when I'm making the cup of tea, am I aware of what happens with that cup of tea as it gets drunk and then as it gets breathed? So there is something about being aware that form or signs, they're just sort of labels that fixed. And what we're trying to get to is where we just see more the process. When we see the change, that we see the becoming, the arising, and the passing away. So, seeing only change can be really liberating. And you could think about moments of liberation where you were able to just be and be aware of things as they arise and pass away, and not grasping and not pushing away, because it's that bit where you can just be with it as it is in its changing way. That's where the liberation is. That's where you don't have the grasping or the aversion. That's the freedom. And it's a way of being, and it's open way of being. It's a relaxed way of being. And yeah, I suppose we can't talk ourselves into awakening. So I propose that we do some practice and we meditate together. And because I think it is about practicing and training. And when we practice, when we train, we can be a real gift to the world. Because over time, each one of us can be with what is. And when you're in the presence of somebody that can just be with whatever is, it's incredibly empowering experience, because there is nothing that person wants from you, nothing that they're expecting from you. They're just there openly with what is. And it can give a tremendous confidence to people around you. So let's practice. And let's practice together. Let's meditate together. So I just want to invite you to find a posture that will serve you for next while. And just allowing to settle, allowing to feel the ground underneath you. letting the earth to do all the holding, and no need to hold on to anything. Nothing to hold on to. Just relaxing, settling into our experience. So with each breath, as you're breathing out, relaxing any points that might be tense. There might be some holding, sometimes especially in legs, hamstrings. Just trusting the earth, trusting the ground underneath you, trusting that to do the holding, to support you fully. Bringing your attention to your heart area, noticing the movement of the chest with each breath. Allowing our body to get filled with awareness. So with this field of awareness, and it's kindly awareness, resting, and I invite you to rest your awareness. Just be breathing out, noticing each breath and it's as it passes away. So just having a period of resting awareness, the end of the breath, of it passing away. And if it feels right, you may change your attention to the start of the breath, noticing the arising of the breath, any movement in the body, so resting your attention as we're breathing in. We can broaden our awareness, bring the whole of the breath, noticing as we're breathing in, knowing we're breathing in, as we're breathing out, knowing we're breathing out. So resting our awareness on the breath, as it comes and goes, all the sensations within the body. Being interested in the arising and the passing. In the last stage, seeing whether we can find a point of stillness, point of stillness, like an anchor to our experience. Whether we can just be with whatever arises, passes away, sensations of the breath, particular feelings, maybe thoughts. Broadening our awareness further to each other, each breathing in, breathing out, practicing collectively, supporting each other in this practice. letting go of any effort. So in your own way, bringing the meditation to a close. And just noticing the transition time. As we're coming out of meditation, we will have an opportunity to go into groups. And in the groups can be an opportunity for you to, well, maybe share some of the reflections from, if anything came from the talk, anything in regards to impermanence, or maybe, what is your attitude, what is your relationship with impermanence? Where is the holding? Is there a holding for you? How do you work with that? Or it might be just an opportunity to connect with others after a week that you've had. So we'll be in groups for 20 minutes and we'll meet back together after that.